Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Wall of Champions, an F1 podcast. And I'd say, and Greg, but we've been dogged. There's no Luce, no Greg, and instead we're joined by Matt. And I'm actually quite thankful for that because I think we can get through a lot of stuff tonight. Good evening, Matt.
Good evening, Webby. How you going?
Look, mate, I'm feeling lonely. We've been scummed by Greg and Luce, and they are also the reason that we didn't broadcast last night either. So what are we supposed to do here? Like
That's okay. We're a top team.
Yeah, we're trying to run a professional organization, and this is what you get. So anyway, let's go right on. Since the last time we spoke, which was before Texas, quite a bit's happened. Obviously, the US Grand Prix and the shortcutting the track and then complaining about the penalty controversy, and of course we crowned a new world champion. And then just today, which was actually quite serendipitous that we delayed the telecast until today because we saw the engine regulations for 2021 released. But we'll start with the United States Grand Prix. And I guess, Matt, it was one of those things where we desperately needed Sebastian Vettel to win that race to keep the championship even with a breath left in its lungs. But it wasn't to be. But it was a cracking drive from Hamilton, who had to overtake two cars to win the race.
Yeah, well, I thought the whole race was really enjoyable to watch. There was plenty of action for most of it, and yeah, it was pretty exciting to watch Seb get the jump on Lewis at the start. I was like, oh, hopefully he can hang on here, but I think he got hurt a little bit by Friday. Didn't do too much running, and then I think even if you compare him to Raikkonen, he wasn't quite keeping his tyres in as well. So in the end, they had to put him on an alternate strategy towards the end, and he got back up, luckily, just to keep the title alive to the next one, Mexico. But Hamilton was class of his own again in America, and full marks to him for another great drive and also another dominant drive over his teammate.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair to say that at the back half of this year, since the summer break, I've watched pretty much every race of Lewis Hamilton's career. I can't think of one I missed, and he's driving the best I've ever seen him drive for sure.
Yeah, and I think he went through a list of reasons in an interview for why that is. I think he said he went vegan was one of them, and the other thing he mentioned was Rosberg, but he mentioned Rosberg's name in the sense that, well, the team doesn't have a toxic atmosphere anymore, therefore I'm driving better, which is not really the case. He's been in a team where he's under no pressure to really beat his teammate because it's not been an issue for him this year, and he's been able to drive without that, without those games being played, and without that consistent pressure of having to be on top every quali, every race.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy to forget that up until the summer break, Vettel was leading the championship. So it's not like it's been a runaway victory for Hamilton. It's just that the chips have fallen his way since the summer break, and he certainly, as I said, he's driving the best I've ever seen him drive. But that also comes on the back of Ferrari having some incredibly bad luck.
Yeah, and I don't know if we'll probably talk about this later when we discuss Mexico, but the value of this championship in Lewis Hamilton's 4 championships, where does this sit? And I think that's a pretty interesting question that, a lot of people have a lot of different views on. But yeah, we'll probably come to that when we get to Mexico. But definitely he's driving good. Like there's no doubt about that. He's consistently smashing Bottas, and Bottas is not an idiot, really. So.
And he's been killing it on Saturday. So clear. What we've seen since the summer break is that the Mercedes has been very dominant on Saturdays, or at least
I think all year, to be honest. Like even Ferrari won quite regularly in the first part of the year, but Mercedes on pole, Melbourne.
Yeah,
I know.
But I think that the theme of the season for me has been that Mercedes have had to do the business on Saturday because they haven't at most races, they haven't had the best car on Sunday. They've been reliant
Yeah.
on qualifying at the front and then holding position. That was certainly true at Russia for Bottas, for example.
He wasn't even on pole for that one, but
Yeah,
yeah,
but
he
got
did
the
just
job at the
make
start,
it. Yeah.
So you've had a number of situations this year where Mercedes have held station on Saturday and then got the result on Sunday through through merely being in front. And what we've seen this year is that it's harder to overtake with these wider cars. They've got more drag, all those kinds of things. The DRS hasn't been as effective. There's been a convergence of power unit performance between three of the manufacturers at least, we'll get to McLaren and Honda, but there's been a convergence there, and it's been much tighter racing. But we've also seen less overtaking. I, for one, don't have a problem with that. I think that the quality of racing this year has probably been superior to what we've seen in the previous 3 seasons of the hybrid era.
It's more about close competition is what you want to see, because
absolutely
there will be overtaking, like whether it's a lot or not a lot, there will always be overtaking. And I think when you've got close competition, when you do get a rare overtake or a season-defining overtake, or you see something special, then it makes it more makes it more special.
Yeah, definitely.
Than what it otherwise would have been in a race of a series of DRS-assisted overtakes, and then one guy does a good one. I think just having that one in a really tightly fought season with a lot of competition, that makes it special. So.
Well, I was also going to say that it's also this season, to a certain extent, for the first time in a while, is we're seeing the return of the art of defence as well, where drivers have had more in their armoury to actually defend position because it hasn't been as easy to slip past somebody in the DRS zone.
And Mexico was a pretty good example of that, I think.
Well, it was a beautiful
segue.
It's a beautiful segue into talking about the end of the United States Grand Prix, of course, where we saw on the last lap the now infamous overtake Max Verstappen on Kimi Räikkönen. And I'll ask you your opinion on that, but I'll give you mine first, which is to say that, well, it's I don't care who you are, what driver you are, what the position you're fighting for is. You're not allowed to overtake a car by shortcutting the track effectively, regardless of what your reasoning may be. If you're saying, the argument of saying, Kimi forced him to the inside, well, that's just racing. You don't get to shortcut the track to gain position. And to me, that's an even more even though by the rules it's the same, it's a more heinous crime than running wide on the exit to gain position. To actually dive down the inside of somebody and take that inside line by shortcutting the track, I think is unacceptable, and I think the right penalty was applied. Certainly, I think if it wasn't the last lap, someone would have been on the radio straight away telling Max that he needs to give that position back. So anyway, that was my feeling of it. I don't want to see the racing get sanitized, but you do have to draw the line at guys, effectively, shortcutting the track to gain advantage. You really can't have that happen.
Yeah, I think with hindsight, I can agree with the decision. I think where it divides everyone is whether it's consistent or not, obviously.
That's a whole separate argument.
And that is a whole separate argument. And I think if you were to take that on its merits, yeah, it's a penalty. I mean, I remember one of the races I did not long ago, I passed somebody off track under yellows.
Well, that's a double whammy.
After yellows actually, but yeah. When you're in the heat of the moment there, and you have to go off track to make an overtake, the argument that Kimi did move over, in Max's head, that will be more than enough reason for him to make that dive and to attempt the overtake, because in his head it's all just bravery, and it's all just in the moment of being in a racing situation.
Yep.
But when you're looking at it from the outside, and there are clear guidelines for what is defined as the track and what isn't, I think that situation, and Charlie Whiting said in the driver's briefing or something that, or was it him? I think it was Kimi actually, he might have said it, but it's all about lasting advantage, and he definitely got a lasting advantage by putting all four wheels over the track there. So it's a shame. It really is a shame, and it was fantastic. It was a great overtake. I think if he's half a meter to the left, he still makes the overtake probably. Maybe he scrubbed side pods with Kimi, but he'll still make it.
Yeah.
So it was a great move, but unfortunately, you have to draw the line somewhere, and for him, it just fell like that. But I mean, on Twitter, if you have a look, at least it's amongst ex-drivers and pundits and all that. Honestly, it was divided 50-50.
Yeah.
Because even like Mark Webber was on Channel 4 going, yeah, it was a shit decision. Like,
yeah,
Mark's pretty straight shooter, and he knows the rules as well. And even he's like, it's a shit decision. Like,
yeah, there's two schools of thought, right? Which is to saying you want to see a race, you want to see the drivers battle, but if you allow a creep to happen where you start allowing and we've actually discussed this during the season, particularly after Hungary with the coming together of Hulkenberg and Magnussen and those kinds of things, is that if you allow this kind of creep to happen where you keep giving the drivers and millimeters of margin to race in, sooner or later you are going to have somebody gain position by doing something completely outrageous, and then you penalize them for it. And then they don't understand a penalty and they lash out at the sport for it. So I'm all for seeing more competitive racing. And I'm more conducive to drivers being run wide on the exit to, not penalising that so much. Unless, of course, you run somebody out onto the grass and they have to retire from the race. But when it comes to actually shortcutting the track or going to the inside of the track where you can actually do far more damage, because you can go in far too hot, you can punt the other guy out of the way that way. You can do all kinds of things and steal the line by effectively using an illegal part of the track. I draw the line very much so at that, which is no. That's completely unacceptable, because that's effectively cheating when it comes to racing.
Yeah, and I mean, like, Kimi moved towards him, but Max has the option to lift at that point.
I think it's one of the things that gets commonly forgotten when you start talking about overtaking, is that people think that the art of overtaking is all about the guy behind being ballsy and pulling off a move. But I mean, I see racing differently, which is I get as much enjoyment about seeing a spirited defense from a driver than what I do, seeing a spirited attack from another. You're allowed to defend position, and if you just keep removing things from the armory that says, well, we actually don't mind if a guy shortcuts the track to take position because it's good racing. It's like, well, how's the guy in front? It's like, it's an old cricket argument where they keep making the sport more about batting because batting's more exciting than bowling. And sooner or later you say, well, at what point is it worth even being a bowler if the sport's not for you anymore?
Yeah. People still enjoy middle stump going through the air as well.
They definitely do. So if you've got to be able to say, and it was the problem with DRS for a long time as well, where it was making the art of defense, like we were talking about earlier, the art of defense completely pointless, because you get to a straight and the guy breezes straight past you anyway. So we've seen some great defenses over the year. I think you won't remember fondly Enrique Benoldi and David Coulthard at Monaco a number of seasons
Actually,
ago.
I didn't get to watch that race, but I know about it now.
Sometimes even if it's not even for a point, if it's not for anything, the art of defense is something that goes unheralded many times in the sport, because we all like seeing the great overtake, but people should be celebrating the fact that, by the same token of Max gaining that position, Kimi was compromised by having to let Seb go, so he lost a lot of time.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for him having to pull over for Seb, Max wouldn't have caught him. Wouldn't have got anywhere near him, really. So Kimi's race is compromised by Ferrari, and then, Max caught him, and Kimi had to hold on in a suboptimal situation to keep that position, and he did. He did so fairly. Max overtook him not fairly. So why is it just all about Max being upset about it and not going, good on Kimi. He's not always the sternest racer in the pack. In fact, he's usually not even in the top 15 of sternest racers in the pack. But he held on, so good on him. So
I think on that one, I think Max did a good job defending Lewis for a little bit there as well. In that race. Like, watching defending's, like you said, just as good as watching attack. So anyway, whichever side you go for, I think the right decision was made. So Got to move on with it.
Agree wholeheartedly. The other couple of things we saw out of the US before we move on to events of Mexico was, first of all, Carlos Sainz made his Renault debut and immediately made Jolyon Palmer look like an absolute scrub.
Yeah, like straight into Q3, point straight away. Like he was right on Hulkenberg's pace. So
well, I think he was. I know Hulkenberg's weekend was compromised due to the power unit penalties he had, so he didn't really run in qualifying. But he was definitely just as fast as Hulkenberg.
In that weekend, I don't think he was quite as good in Mexico, but you got to give him time. Anyway, the reality is Hulkenberg's been in that seat all year, and is not a muppet. It's not like some other guy has been in that seat all year and Sainz is off him. It's Nico Hulkenberg, so he did extremely well to get as close as he did.
I think it shows.
In America.
I think it shows for the most part that Renault have if they build a decent car next year, they are going to be formidable in terms of the strength of their driver lineup. They have the potential to have a driver lineup just as strong as the Verstappen-Ricciardo driving lineup, and if they actually do make a decent chassis next year, and their power unit maintains the performance curve that it's been on this year, they will be a significant threat to regular podiums, I think, next year.
I think next year is going to be, I think, teams like Williams and Force India.
They are going to have bad years, I think.
They're going to have, this is, for me, from what I can see, unless Mercedes do something drastic, which I doubt, because it's starting to get to the diminishing return point, I think. I think Williams and Force India, this is their last year as 4 and 5, and they'll be more like 6 and 7 or 7 and 8 even next year.
I see next year. Obviously we'll talk more about next year after Abu Dhabi. We'll have a special about what we think for next year, and then obviously we'll have coverage during preseason testing. But I think that next year is shaping up well for McLaren and Renault to make significant strides forward. Toro Rosso will be a dark horse depending on what Honda bring to the table. I think Toro Rosso will save Force India Williams bluffers next year, because they're going to them having Honda is what's going to keep Force India and Williams above water, I guess. I also have significant concerns for Haas. Because I think that they're in that same category where I don't think that they'll make gains next year. They're more likely to stagnate, the same situation with Sauber.
So, look, Sauber will probably make a step forward, but I don't think they'll
have a better power unit. But
yeah, I just don't think they
don't have the money.
Got enough to They don't have the money. They turned down Ferrari's non-registered parts or non-listed parts or something that they were looking at. Which is pretty much what Haas does. They decided against that for next year because it's too late in the design.
Yeah.
So they're probably compromised in a few areas there, not being able to take Ferrari parts. So Sauber will have a better year, but all things being equal, they might get up to Haas, but that's still 9th and 10th. So.
Yeah. All right, so and what else did we see in the United States? Obviously, I was there. My first ever trip to the States, and I was at COTA. Had beautiful seating position at turn 3, 4, 5, 6. It was a great weekend, and I'd just like to take a minute to acknowledge that the Circuit of Americas is an extremely well run facility. It was smooth there. The American fans were great, if not a little lack of knowledge, but that was certainly to be expected. They embraced Formula One, which was great. The crowd was really big. The grandstands were chock full, and the drivers were super popular in the arena in the middle of the track when they were there. Got some funny video of Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen messing around with the lasso. That was quite funny to see. And no one kneeled for the anthem, so
no one took a knee. I was gonna give Hamilton a knee.
No one took a knee.
So they got
but it was a super well run facility. Austin is a beautiful town. If anyone's ever considering about popping out to Texas to check out the Grand Prix, would highly recommend it. It was a very well run event, and got to ride in a yellow school bus to the track every day, and that felt like I was in a TV show from when I was growing up.
Back at school.
Well, no yellow school buses here in Australia, but yeah, it was great. So
And the intros, what do you think of the driver intros?
sort of difficult to follow at the track. So we had
Okay.
a couple of screens that we could see. Obviously, we heard the announcer. So I thought it looked okay, but I wouldn't want to see it at every race. Because
Yeah, I think
it just
horses.
doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't suit the tenor of Formula One, I don't think. But hats off to Liberty for trying. They've tried a number of things this year. For the most part, it's been positive. They've done a couple of things that I don't really like very much. I'm not necessarily a fan of the park the car in the grid and then interview the drivers on the straight whilst the mechanics wheel the car away.
Yeah, just on that, like
Yep.
Hamilton was world champion, and we'll get onto all that crap later.
Yes, we
but
will.
the moment he got out of the car,
That was stupid. That was
They
bad.
parked him there, and then they got DC's got a microphone shoved in him.
Yep.
Now, sure, we want to hear from the new world champion, but I'd rather watch him soak up the emotion and be with his team and stuff like that, and then hear from him.
Yep.
And get to see that emotion, because that's what the sport's all about.
Yep.
All the great scenes of Alonso getting out of the car in '05 and screaming, and
Well, when
he won his
Yeah.
titles,
when did they think they were
we're
going to get
robbed of that.
Yeah, when did they think we were going to get the better interview out of him? Right at that when he's rushing to get to the team and he's just giving fob off answers, or after he's had that celebration, actually has some time to sit with, to talk to DC and not be in a hurry to get out of there. I mean, to me, that was awful. I thought DC effectively almost bullying him into answering questions was not right. And the way they spoke to the other three just straight after the race, straight out of the car, I didn't like that. I prefer to see the drivers get into the cool down room and catch their breath, have the podium, and then you can ask the questions. I actually don't mind the podium interviews so much. But that was bad. What they did after the race was bad. It should have let Hamilton go celebrate with his team, and then have him on the podium afterwards, and then ask him questions up there after he's had a chance to celebrate a little bit and soak it up. Because what's the point in asking him questions straight out of the car? He's gonna be like, yeah, man, yeah, it feels good. See you later. Yeah, it was pointless. But yeah, we'll get to that. But as I said, hats off to Liberty for trying things this year. They've certainly done more this year to enhance the spectacle of Formula One than FOM and the FIA had managed to do at any point over the last decade. I feel that not everything's going to come off. Not everything's going to look. Not everything's going to look as sharp and cool as some of the other things they're
User
doing.
in your channel timed out.
But it seems like Matt's gone, so I'm just going to have to sit here and carry on. He's all right. So yeah, just to finish off my thoughts on that, I didn't think that the post race interview with Hamilton was effective, and I hope they don't. I hope they take that as a thing that they probably shouldn't do that again. So anyway, I'll see if Matt's able to be dragged back in here.
User was moved to your channel.
Good.
Oh, almost a solo presentation there.
It was. I was just finishing off my thoughts. It was very awkward.
But what I wanted to say was it's better for us that we get to see that emotion. They can't use the excuse of, oh, we put a microphone in front of him because that's what our viewers wanted. That's not what we want. I don't want to see that.
Yeah. Yep.
So I don't really get it, and I hope somebody told them that was the wrong thing to do, and that they don't do it next year.
Yep. All right. So but we'll finish off the US thing. So the highlight for me for that weekend was obviously being at the track. The weather was great. Like I said, it was a great experience to be there. Would certainly consider going back to COTA again. I was only irked by the Verstappens, both Max and more importantly Yoss's reaction after the race that I felt wasn't very cordial and it was a bit unbecoming of them.
Yeah, but I think just in the heat of the moment, they would have forgotten that now after Mexico. So it's all water under the bridge.
Yep. Well, Mexico resolved all of it, so might as well go on and talk about Mexico. And what a heck of a race! I mean, starting with qualifying, it was stunning. you know, it looked like early that Mercedes were pretty strong, but then we hit Q2, and all of a sudden Verstappen was half a second faster than everybody else, and it was crazy. And in the end, he couldn't get the pole position because Sebastian pulled out a Sebastian lap. It was a terrific session, and it was great to see Mercedes sort of take a back step to the Vettel Verstappen battle. You know, it was great to see. I think it's been quite a while since we saw something in qualifying quite that special and unexpected as Seb actually pipping Verstappen right there at the end.
Yeah, and just shows you like when the cars are so close, like they are now. Those top three cars are starting to get really close together. How important it is to get your lap together, because I think Max did have ultimately a couple of tenths up his sleeve to get the pole, but he just didn't execute the lap, and there were reasons for that. Obviously, the tire thing and the warm up routine, and they didn't quite get that right, I think. But in any case, Seb did put the lap together, and he was rewarded with the pole position. So it was a mega lap, and that was his 50th pole, and he's now 20 behind Lewis. But obviously, he's been a while since he's been a dominant car. Yeah. But for me, Seb's been just as impressive as Lewis in qualifying this year. He just hasn't had the quickest car in qualifying. But he's like, you know, you can't say, oh, you know, Kimi's out-qualified him a lot of the time. You know, yeah, sure, he beat him in Monaco. As far as I'm concerned, Seb's done an awesome job in qualifying as well, and that was another really, really good lap.
Yeah, I think that Seb's done a tremendous job this year, full stop. It's just, you know, his season will be blighted by, you know, what happened in Azerbaijan, and obviously what happened at Singapore, even though, you know, that was a sort of a mutual accident between a couple of cars there. You know, but his season will be blighted by that, and you know, and by the same token, Hamilton hasn't had those problems either from an accident perspective or from a reliability perspective.
But I have to say, like in terms of weekends as a whole and driving performance, Seb has been on the pace every weekend.
Yep.
Especially relative to his teammate. Now, you could say that Kimi's not as strong as Bottas or whatever, but Lewis did have, and it was a long time ago now, but he did have those off weekends when Bottas won the race. Yeah.
Russia,
and Spain. He did have those off weekends, and I think Spain wasn't one of them. Actually, I think he won Spain, but
yep.
But Seb hasn't had those. Seb's been on top of Kimi all day, every weekend. Sure, he made the stuff up in Azerbaijan, and you know, arguably Singapore was his fault as well. But he has not put pace-wise. He's not been off with the fairies at any Grand Prix this year, and you know, he would have been a worthy world champion as well. But just you know, a season is everything. It's not just how well you drive. It's your team and little things like Azerbaijan and Singapore, and just, you know, you've got to put everything together. And he, as a team with Ferrari, they were lacking compared to Hamilton and Mercedes in certain areas. But I can't fault Seb's driving this year. He's been awesome.
Yeah. So sorry, when I said Spain, I didn't mean Spain. I meant Austria. So Bottas won in Austria.
Yep, Austria. Yeah.
And Hamilton was fourth. So you know, he was beaten by both Vettel and Ricciardo that day.
Yeah, and there was only a couple of races, like, but 2 is enough in a championship. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yep, yeah. So I think that the 2017 season will look back on Sebastian Vettel kindly with an asterisk next to Azerbaijan for what happened there, because that was pretty bad.
Yeah, and he threw away a win there.
Not only that, he did something very, very unbecoming of a professional race car driver. Like, that was pretty unacceptable. But you know, it was just a shame that the championship's been decided three races out from the finish, because it really did deserve in the first 3 quarters of the season. It really did deserve to be one that went right down to the wire. And it's just a shame that we were sort of robbed of that close finish with a bit of Ferrari unreliability and you know, and then the accident at Singapore. So it could have been a classic, but hopefully we've got next year to look forward to, and we might see a classic next year. So.
Probably.
All right.
I think we'll.
Yep. So the first couple of corners at Mexico were quite interesting with Hamilton, Vettel, and Verstappen battling it out, which in the end saw obviously contact between Hamilton and Vettel that saw them both into the pits after the first lap. At which point, that was really the point that decided that ended the championship right there, when Vettel had to pit as well. And it was probably a good thing in that it wasn't one of those things where Seb got away with it and Hamilton had to pit. And you had contact between the two championship leaders, and it goes on because of a bit of misfortune for Hamilton. I think he definitely deserved to win the championship this year, but it would have been unfortunate if he had to make that pit stop and Seb had to continued on, won the race, and then it closed up the last two races. So it was probably quite fitting in the end that it went like that, even though it ended the championship a little bit early. But I got to say that Seb's drive back through the field was tremendous. His pace, even a pace advantage over Hamilton, he was on fire. To come back from, I know that he, after the pit stop, I think he was 24 seconds ahead of Hamilton, so he already had a significant advantage over him. But the way he skived through the pack, he was far superior to Hamilton getting through traffic.
I can't. I thought it was less than that when he got out of the pits.
I think it was quite significant because Hamilton had a slow lap.
It wasn't small, yeah. But and then Seb got up to fourth, and Lewis could only manage ninth or 10th, or what. He was very close to 9th, wasn't he?
It was 8th.
Where he was, yeah. He got Magnussen in the end, I think. Yep. But it was, Seb did a tremendous drive. Like you couldn't fault him. The first lap thing was, I think in hindsight maybe a touch clumsy from Seb. He got shoved out by Verstappen, and then Lewis capitalized as well. And I think Lewis tried to go around the outside and kind of got balked a little bit by Verstappen, just slightly, and Seb kind of mixed with an oversteer moment and trying to get on the power early to recover his spot from Lewis, just went into the back of him. So it was just one of those things. Bloody Sky and people tweeting Sky trying to say that, did he do it on purpose? I mean, that is ridiculous. There's no way he did that on purpose, and I doubt. You just looking at the incident, how clumsy it looks. You can tell it's not on purpose, but you've got these idiots on Twitter tweeting in, asking, even thinking that it could be on purpose.
Well, even Hamilton asking the question over radio, right? Was that deliberate? And it's like, well, of course it wasn't. He busted. As Brundle was quite rightly saying, in a battle between a front wing and a rear and a tire, the front wing will lose every single time, and sometimes you'll get a puncture. Yeah. It was a silly thing. It was a silly thing to suggest.
But he asked it because in his head he's got this thing after Azerbaijan that Seb is out to get him, and even in the driver's briefing for Mexico, he asked the question, Seb cut the track deliberately at turn whatever on the outlap in Austin. He gained 3/10 through that corner. Why wasn't he given a penalty? So he's eating at him, like, even in the driver's briefing, and then Seb's looking around going, what the hell's going on here? Like, I ran a bit wide, and now he's like dobbing on me. Like it's like being back at school. Like Lewis has just been picking at him the whole year. Like, again, the Malaysia thing when he took a lift back to the
didn't leave his steering wheel.
Lewis mentions it in the driver's briefing. Yep. Seb runs wide. Lewis mentions it in the driver's briefing. It's just ridiculous. Like,
mind you, Hamilton's always been a little bit like that, from a victim complex kind of thing. He's always always felt like the world's out to get him kind of thing. There's a couple of infamous comments in his past where he might have suggested that the world was out to get him for various reasons. Thinking of Monaco and stewards. So, but at the same time, it's like, it must be very difficult. I mean, he's a guy who's operated at the top of Formula One since he's been in it. And I think it's very difficult to see life from the bottom of the mountain when you've always been at the top, if you know what I mean. I think it's...
Yeah, and he's got a massive fan base, who would be feeding him this stuff as well.
Yeah. I think
They,
there's a portion, and I'm not being critical of him here because I think it's just a natural life experience thing. Anybody who well in any kind of career is the same. I think there's a certain element of experience that comes from struggling, and I think that for a guy, Vettel's driven a garbage Toro Rosso. He spent time racing, really at the back for a whole season kind of thing. Fernando, obviously, when I think he probably learnt more in 2008 going back to Renault and struggling than what he did in 2005, 2006 and 2007. I think that, there's a certain... all the other drivers on the grid have had that time in a garbage midfield car with no shot at victory. Whereas Hamilton, as he's proven, because he's won a race in every season of his F1 career, and even in his junior career, he was always in top teams. And as I said, I'm not having to go at him because he's got the talent and he deserves to be there. I'm not saying for a second that he's #blessed or anything like that. What I mean is that I think there's a certain level of experience that comes from struggling. And I think that in Formula One, Hamilton's never been in that position for a long period of time. Obviously, he's had 2009, the McLaren was crap at the start of the year. It was winning races by the middle of the season. I mean that for an entire season of having where you're just racing to get a couple of points. He's never had that in his career kind of thing. He's always been able to fight for podiums and wins.
and to be honest, like for that first half of '09, you can't say he handled it that well.
Yeah.
Like he was out in Q1, he was asking for a new car, he was frustrated as hell. But then, it came good pretty quickly, so everyone forgot about that. But
it's not a humbleness because Formula One drivers aren't humble. Like that top sportsmen just aren't, like because they're treated like demigods. But and so it's very difficult to be humble in that regard. I'm sure they are on some level, but not like an everyday person is. I mean, I'd be the same. Don't worry. I'm not saying that I'm in any way morally superior to them because we're all the same in that regard. But I think that there's, as I said, there's a certain experience that comes from racing when there's not much on the line. And Hamilton's never really had that in his F1 career. He's always been pretty close to the pointy end. And so I think it's very, very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that everybody's out there sniping to get you because you're at the front of the pack. And that sometimes you forget that some people are just out there to race. Like they're not looking at anyone in particular other than getting the best result they possibly can. Whereas Hamilton's always had a target on his back because he's always been at the front.
yeah, exactly. And Seb's just doing his own thing there. And Azerbaijan was definitely something that shouldn't have happened, and he did put an action towards Lewis. But that's just that's not every day. That's just a one-off thing that happened.
I think that there's a perfect there's a if you for anyone who might be sitting out there thinking, oh, Webby, you sound like you're full of crap. You've only got to look at the relationship between Hamilton and Rosberg to see what I'm saying. Is that the whole time Hamilton was what's the word I'm looking for? He was always nervous. He was always suspicious that Rosberg was plotting against him within the team. Whereas Rosberg was just there doing the very best he could and trying to shut out the relationship with Hamilton and not wanting to talk about the relationship with Hamilton, not wanting to talk about the championship. Rosberg never acted like he was the hunted, whereas Hamilton always acted like he was the hunted and that he had to protect himself from Rosberg.
Yeah, like I'm sure Rosberg played games.
Oh, I'm 100% sure of that. I'm sure he definitely did.
But for example, the moving of the engineers at the start of last year.
Yeah.
Hamilton plays himself the victim in that. Why does he play himself the victim in that? Well, he had a bad start to the year, and now all of a sudden his mechanics changed. That's the reason for it, which is complete bullshit. But Rosberg took that at the start of the year and took it into an advantage, where in actual fact it would have been equally difficult for both of them to have to change engineers and do all that. Like that wouldn't have been. It's not like Nico got better engineers or better mechanics. Like it's Mercedes. I'm sure that they've got the best of the best across the board. Not we'll give our good mechanics to Lewis or we'll give our good mechanics to Nico. It doesn't happen like that.
Yeah.
But Lewis took what you just said, like Mercedes were out to get him, which is just like,
Even Malaysia, after Malaysia last year, if you go look at his comments after the race, I'm sure he looks back on that now and regrets it wholeheartedly. But it's symptomatic of the perspective of his first reaction is to always defend because he's always been the target. Whereas a
Yeah.
driver like Vettel, a driver like, and Seb spent plenty of time in a top car, but like he's also spent time in a not top car. And I think that, you know, as I said, there's a certain experience. I'm not gonna say maturity, but there's a certain experience that comes out of really struggling for Formula One and racing race to race just for points. That it's an experience that Hamilton doesn't have, and if he ever has that, if he ever actually has a couple of seasons or a season where he's in a garbage car, he's got no sight of victory, he doesn't get a win, he's struggling for podiums, I think that he'd be a better driver on the other side of it, because he'd realize, wait, I'm not the pointy end of the arrow with a target on my back. I'm just another dude out here to race. And I kind of feel like, in the same way that Fernando got better after he got out of front running cars. And that if he came back to one now, he'd be super fast. So, I think even Vettel, if you want an example, Vettel in his Red Bull days, yeah, he was petulant and carried on a bit and all those kinds of things in the top car. Since he got beaten by a teammate in 2013, he's been at Ferrari. He's had to basically start from the midfield and work his way back up again. From a personality perspective, he seems much more level-headed now than what he was back when he was winning 4 championships in a row kind of thing. I feel like he would handle, like 2010 with his incidents with Webber, he would handle that very differently now as a driver who's been through that.
Maybe he would, but look, I mean, last year he got on the radio a fair bit and he wasn't happy.
He does that.
I just think he's not like scared like Hamilton appears to be of everyone. Seb can hold himself up, and Lewis talks the talk, like throw whoever you want next to me, I'll race anyone, sort of thing.
Yep.
He talks the talk, but in reality he's full of
well, I mean, he's had 3
like
problems.
he's had 3.
He's had 3. Obviously he had all kinds of issues with Fernando, equally as much Fernando as it was Hamilton, and the team cultivated that problem by Ron Dennis not. I mean, I've always said this, but Ron Dennis didn't handle that situation correctly, I don't think. And obviously he had his issues with Jensen. As much as they're friends, there was the infamous Twitter sharing of telemetry and all those kinds of things.
Canada.
And Canada, where Jensen put him in the wall.
Deliberate.
And obviously he had significant issues with Rosberg, and I can't really recall any driver on the grid who's had a number of issues like that with multiple teammates. Obviously, Vettel and Webber didn't get along as teammates, but Seb's never seemed to have any problem. He didn't have any problem with Ricciardo, and he certainly hasn't had any problem with Kimi like that we've seen. So yeah. Anyway, I don't want to harp on.
We're not bashing him.
No. As I said, it's not a criticism of him. What I mean is that it's just there's a certain experience there of being not in the best car on the track for a long period of time and having to find out. And you get conditioned like that. Obviously, he had the best car for 3 years straight. This year, he's had arguably the best car. So anyway, but he did win his 4th world championship. So he equals Sebastian Vettel, and Alain Prost as a 4-time Formula One world champion. And
he fully deserves it.
He definitely
He's
does.
a worthy world champion for this year. Do I think it's his best championship?
No.
Probably from what we've discussed already with how Bottas has, at the start of the year, he's outpaced on a couple of occasions.
I mean, it's really difficult to say because I think that his hardest won championship was 2008.
Yeah, I'd actually go with 14 to be honest. But
yeah, well, 14 he dominated. He smashed he like Rosberg couldn't really hold a candle to him in 2014.
Yeah, I think 14 was a real mental slog, and I think 08 he lost a lot of he got penalised a couple of times, and but by the time he got by the time he got to Brazil, like I think he had it under control. It was just Brazil was such a crazy race that it ended up going down to the wire. But I think for me, 14 seemed like a slog, like just one bashing the other one wins, then the next week the other one wins, and I think somehow by the end of before Abu Dhabi, he found a way to get on top, but it was only just before the end, after a year of fighting, and they had the double points as well, which made it a bit scary for him. But Yeah, what I'm getting at is I think it just, after the summer break, when Ferrari kind of had their issues and Lewis, winning Spa when he didn't have the quickest car, like winning Singapore when three people in front of him got taken out and Daniel had a problem with his gearbox or whatever it was. Like getting those two wins on tracks that he could have lost at. Plus the reliability problems, like it really helped him out.
Yeah, and plus when push came to shove after the summer break, he accelerated past Bottas at a significant pace.
Yeah, he took Bottas apart in that section. Like that's when he was like 4 or 5 tenths in quali or even more. And then he took full advantage of all those things. Like you can't begrudge him that. He's a deserving world champion.
Definitely.
But I just don't see that this title was quite as difficult as maybe other ones that he's won. And Fernando said as well, the exact same thing. No teammates to bother him this year. Had it a bit easy. And we'll see next year what it's like. But he deserves to be world champion, and he deserves to be 4 times world champion. He's
all right.
Saturday's amazing.
Yep. So obviously we'll finish off with Verstappen. Verstappen won the race. I think it's one of those things where it's no longer rare or it's no longer a surprise to see Verstappen at the top. He's clearly got talent. The other thing I wanted to say to you was that, do you remember at the start of the season, sort of in the first 3 or 4 races, when the pundits were constantly talking to Christian Horner about the Red Bull, and they were underperforming, and he said after the summer break we'll be winning races on pace, not by accident, not by mistake. And I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I believed what he said, but he was right, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what's happened the last couple of races, but if you look back from Malaysia, what was before Malaysia? I can't remember off the top of my head, but
was it Singapore?
It's been Singapore, Malaysia.
Well, even Spa.
Austin.
They were quick at Spa.
Yeah, they were quick, but I don't think they could have won at Spa.
No.
But you got Malaysia, Singapore, Japan, Austin, and now Mexico. All races that Red Bull could have won and have won 2 out of them.
And not only that, not only won them because they were there or thereabouts, but won them legitimately on pace. Had the race gone their way.
And that's like even further ahead than they were, even closer than they were at the end of last year. So they've really stepped it up in the last 4 or 5 races, to the point where if the season had started then, they'd be legitimate title contenders.
Yeah, and so we know that move forward is not only their chassis, it's also the Renault package has improved immensely from the middle of the season onwards, because we've also seen Renault take a step forward as well. Obviously,
but very quietly. Like I haven't heard any sort of big upgrades or anything like that. But quietly they have moved forward.
After they replaced the MGU, because remember they started the season with the 2016 MGUH. They moved forward to the new one. They've taken steps forward. Red Bull's had constant developments because obviously they've taken power units quite regularly. And they're likely to be a force to be reckoned with next year if they continue this upward curve. You would think that the season being the way that it was, I mean, Ricciardo and Verstappen were out of the championship a long time ago. So you would think that Red Bull would be the least likely team to move forward because they're not fighting for the championship. No car development, focused on next year. And you would expect it to be Mercedes and Ferrari to stretch away at the end of the year because they're battling out for the title. But instead it was Red Bull who's made all the gains in the back end of the year, whilst Mercedes and Ferrari would be still developing. So the hallmarks are all there for Red Bull to have a very strong 2018, I would have thought.
I think everything carries over this year, unlike last year.
Yep.
And, you can keep developing and it still carries some relevance. So there's incentive to keep doing it. But 100% Ferrari and Merc definitely haven't had the rate of development that Red Bull have had, particularly in the second half of the year.
Yeah.
And I think we saw it coming to a certain extent. I think me and you mentioned in a previous podcast, if Ricciardo gets, I think it was around Silverstone time, we're like, if Ricciardo can get a couple of wins and a few more podiums, like he's kind of within reach for the championship.
Yep.
Because he'd been, pretty consistent up until that point, whereas Max had all the
but he's
all the DNFs.
I mean, then he got a bit unlucky after that and had a few like
Yeah.
the gearbox problem. At
Yeah, and
Singapore.
Red Bull didn't quite develop as quickly as I thought, but this is what I was expecting. What we've seen the last 4 or 5 races, probably what I was expecting a little bit earlier, but probably combination of their development and Renault's development that's happened at this point of the year.
It's
but
just
100% next year's.
Yeah, it's just a juicy thing to think about that we could very well have 3 teams in contention for the championship, and when you've got a driver lineup of it's going to be interesting because you've clearly got on pace at least the back half of this year. It looks like Hamilton's got half a second on Bottas as much. Although the start of the season probably indicated Bottas was going to stay closer. I don't know why he's fallen off so much. Clearly Vettel's faster than Kimi. But the Ricciardo and Verstappen are an interesting pair because they're both incredibly quick and both incredibly canny racers. So if you even sneeze and allow one of them to the front of the field, they will beat you all day long.
Yeah, they're going to be a handful next year, both of them.
Yeah,
are just going to be difficult to deal with. I mean, I do fear a little bit for Ricciardo, and I think Greg sent me an email about this on Monday and kind of agreed with him.
It was good of him to at least contribute vicariously to the stream.
He's contributed via email. We both kind of feel that we fear a little bit for Daniel in that Max has really got the momentum now, and the hype as well.
Yep.
And I think that does add a little bit. And Daniel's very quickly being looked at as, they re-signed Max, and now Daniel's under a little bit of. He's not in a bad.
I think
he's not in a bad spot,
yeah,
but he's.
Yeah.
All eyes are on him. Like he needs to beat Verstappen now, so Red Bull can go. Yeah, we really want you here. But if Max keeps beating him, then they're not going to give a shit if he goes anywhere. Because, they'll just get signs in and they've got Max, so who cares? I think he needs to arrest this qualifying slide, firstly, that he's kind of in with Max and has been in this year, and just get on top of him there a little bit more. And then hopefully that'll help him deliver in the races when finally both of them are racing together.
I'd like to see him win in one of the last 2 just to get a bit of his own get a bit of that swagger back into his step. So I think that Red Bull's improvement at the back end of the year has been incredibly impressive, and I think it bodes well for next year. I really hope they can keep it up, and that Renault are going to go ahead and keep developing that power unit to be more on parity with Ferrari and Mercedes, and using that as a segue to have a quick chat about the release today of the sport's proposed regulations for 2021 and beyond. I'm not sure if you've read them yet.
Yeah, I did. I've read that and some reaction as well.
What's your initial reaction to it?
I don't know what to think. I don't know what to think in the sense that I'm not sure technically of a few things. The first thing is the rev limit increase. Some people say it's 3,000 RPM on top of what they run at the moment, which is like 11 max sort of thing. That'd be a 14,000 RPM sort of in that range.
Yeah, I've got my own take on that, but I'll let you finish. I think I know what it means, but yeah.
Or the 18,000. The current rev limit's 15,000, and they increased that to 18,000.
I think what they're looking for. I don't know if they'll actually increase it to 18,000, but I think what they're going to do is relax the fuel flow limit.
Yeah, they will do that.
Yeah, and they'll relax the. They're going to give them more engines per season, and I think that their hope is that if we do that for you, can you please rev the engines out to 15,000 revs, please?
Yeah, they have to do that, and the other thing was the removal of the H, which I'm reading different things, and I can't really remember what was said earlier in the year when they discussed it. But the removal of the H with regards to the engine sound, I got Craig Scarborough tweeted saying, "Oh, it doesn't really make much difference to the sound because it's attached to the turbo, but it doesn't really it's not really muffling the turbo. And then you got an article from Mark Hughes that says, "Oh, removing the H removes the muffling of the turbo, and we should get a better sound." So I don't know where that sits with regards to the sound. I mean, it certainly takes the complexity out of it, which, you know, Renault and Honda have struggled with. But then reaction is that Ferrari and Merc want the H still there. And I think for the sake of competition, Merc and Ferrari need to kind of let that one go. The H is a great bit of technology, but to me...
I mean, Ferrari are arguing for the H, and yet in 2013 or in 2012 when I was framing the rules, Ferrari didn't want the H.
Yeah, so look, because they've got a good handle on it now.
Correct. That's
of
the
course
only,
they're
that's the only reason they want it.
Same with Merc, they've got a good handle on it. It's their big advantage.
Oh, you'd expect Merc to argue hard because, like you said, the H is the performance differentiator.
Yeah, it's got to be. But I don't want the H to be the performance differentiator because, as far as I'm aware, and somebody might know better than me, but a lot of the top supercars on the road don't have the H. They've got the K, and they've got varying.
Oh, they don't rev cars out hard enough on the road or run them hot enough for an H to be of any value.
So the H is just a great piece of technology that can't be used anywhere.
Yeah, it's got zero road relevance because you can't really fundamentally put it into a road car. And all it is a huge performance differentiator. It's the most complex part. I mean, the complexity of the piece of equipment is amazing, but it doesn't make the sport better. It makes the sport worse.
And there's a lot of people on Twitter who are going, "Oh, I'm disappointed the H is gone." No, but I'm like, you can't, like, disappointed for what? There's the H you can't have the H there because it's a great piece of technology.
Correct.
Like when you look at a McLaren P1 or a LaFerrari which don't have the H, and no one looks at that and go, "Oh shit, you know, what a dyno car."
Yeah, to me,
what a dinosaur technology.
Yeah, to me, they could have put a whole bunch of stuff in there, and as long as point number 4 was in there, removal of the MGUH, I was going to be happy. I hate the MGUH. I mean, I think that the complexity of the technology is amazing. I think that what Mercedes and Ferrari and Renault and Honda have achieved with it is just phenomenal. It's fantastic engineering, the efficiency they get out of it. But the fact that it's going from the sport, I couldn't be happier. Because I freaking hate the thing. Because all it's done is given Mercedes a massive advantage. It's made Honda look like dumbasses for the last 4 years because they haven't been able. Yeah, no, but it's the MGUH is their problem. It's the generation of the power and the deployment of that power. And if you just take the H out of it and you just go, now you've effectively got an overpowered or a very powerful KERS unit. Hey, yeah, everyone can handle that. They've been doing KERS for nearly 10 years. So.
Yeah. And that can be a differentiator. And will be a differentiator.
But but power units for me get stuffed. They shouldn't be a differentiator. The car is a differentiator for me in Formula One. It should be.
I'm happy for the power unit to be a differentiator, but only as a percentage of the differentiation. And the percentage is too high at the moment.
I mean, what we've probably seen this year is that Mercedes have no better than the third best car on the grid as a chassis, maybe even the fourth best if you consider the McLaren.
Fourth, yeah, for sure.
The McLaren is clearly a very, very good car. Once they've sorted it, they sorted out their aero after the summer break, and they've taken a big step forward from car performance-wise, whilst Honda haven't taken steps forward at all. And you know, and yet they've been able to continuously win qualifying through A, the brilliance of Hamilton over a single lap, and B, magic engine modes that nobody else has got. Like they've got, you know, they can turn up a huge amount of power. And I think that there's a few things about this that I'm not seeing anything really negative in it. Would I have loved if they'd gone back to a V8 or a V10? Of course I would have. Was it realistic they were going to? No, they were never going to do that. And it's a bloody shame because I would have loved for them to go back to it. But, you know, the fact that they're, getting rid of the MGUH to simplify the engine. B, you know, they're going to standardize the energy store and the control electronics. Great idea, good for the small teams. As is the plug and play element that they're going for, where they're saying, you know, teams, it should be fairly standard so a team can switch engine suppliers from season to season and not have to completely redesign their entire chassis, kind of thing.
Yeah,
I think that's a great idea. And not only that, if you can mix and match, so maybe you can buy your gearbox from Red Bull or from Williams, and then also have your power unit from Mercedes, kind of thing. I mean, I think that's a good, that gives, that's competition. It's capitalism within the sport. I think it's a good thing to do. And if they can loosen off the fuel so that you've got a higher fuel flow limit, but then just keep how much fuel you can use for the race, and let the engines rev harder so they make more noise, or sorry, they can already rev out to 15,000. No one does it because of the fuel flow regulation, and because of the fact that you've got to use, only 4 engines. Double it. That's what they're doing. And they're talking about 6 to 8 engines for the year. That's a great thing. That's a great idea. And just to simplify it and to make it more appealing to other engine or other power unit makers to come into the sport and to be competitive. I mean, you got to think the Volkswagen Group, are sitting there looking at the example of Honda set, and they're going, why would we go anywhere near Formula One? So, and everyone knows that Honda's problem, the MGUH, and their vibration issues this year. but yeah,
and their lack of overall
expertise,
turbulent jet ignition technology, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
lean combustion technology. And just
are these regulations going to piss off Mercedes? Yes, they will. Are they going to piss off Ferrari? Ferrari will hang around. They're fine. I think that the moment Mercedes starts getting beaten, they're going to leave anyway. So
look, Toto Wolff said this is just from what I translated in German. He basically said, look, this is just a starting point for discussions. But what he said, in fairness to him, he didn't want to say too much, but what he did say was that this is not going to be cheap to do, because now we've got to redesign the engine to run without the H, and the turbocharger's affected quite a bit. And it's not, it's a V6 with a turbo, but it's not quite as cheap to make the changeover as we probably would have thought.
With all due respect to Toto Wolff, I couldn't give two stuffs. Let's not forget, Mercedes and Renault did this to the sport in the first place. So the fact that they're going to sit there and bitch now that, it's going to be expensive to design this engine. How much have you invested so far on the current regulations? And the only reason you want to keep it is because it's allowed you to dominate the sport for 4 years. So if they had been getting beaten by Ferrari for 4 years, they'd be screaming from the hilltops to do this, or they would have left already. So
I think part 2 of this discussion will happen next week when they unveil the financial structure, I guess, for want of a better word, of the sport and budget caps and all that, because maybe there will be in that discussion a way that is sustainable for these guys to start developing their engines without going into a massive spending research and development war straight off the bat.
Yeah,
I mean they've deliberately kept the rules vague in what was released today to stop teams and manufacturers starting already designs. Like they just said turbo will be limited in size. What's the size? Like no one knows anything really.
Yep.
It's kept very conceptual so that no one can start doing stuff. So
I read what Toto said today, and it was completely understandable, everything that he said, and of course he was going to say those things. But I look at that and say, but it's not like the power unit they introduced in 2014 was going to be the power unit until Armageddon. Like it's not going to be the power unit until the end of time. Sooner or later the rules are going to change. You're going to have to invest money to design it, or you're going to have to leave. So if you don't like it, Mercedes, go away. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like I mean, if you're gonna sit there and whinge to say, we're not happy that we have to design one of these 1.6 liter V6 turbos to work without an MGUH, I couldn't care less. So then leave.
Look, they'll stay. I mean,
it's
too much of it. They're killing it in the marketing department. Like,
I mean, how do they think Honda feels? I mean, how much money has Honda spent to get nowhere in Formula One over the last 4 years?
Yeah, the H technology for it to go. Like they've busted their balls, crushed their reputation.
I'm sure they're.
And then H is going.
I'm sure they're having a big Matsuri in Sakura. Like they're having a huge celebration in Sakura, saying, "Thank God the MGUH is dead in a few years' time, and we can forget about it." Because, I mean, as I said, it was completely acceptable. But the argument saying, "Oh, this isn't going to be cheap," then don't spend the money. Then just go. Because Formula One can't afford to have something like the MGUH, which decides championships on its own.
And I think, you know, they'll have if Porsche, like, this is Toto Wolff talking, but if Porsche like what they see and Audi like what they see, or, you know, Lamborghini like what they see,
the sport
they're
is
not going to hand the sport over to them.
The sport
Like,
is
they're not going to go, yeah, you guys walk in and you become world champions and we'll just watch you. It's like, they're like, fuck. We want to be the German manufacturer that, you know, we don't, BMW, Merc don't want to lose to BMW, or, you know, they'll spend the money. They've made enough fucking money
I mean,
out of the last 4 years.
The sport is bigger than Mercedes' wallet, right? So if they can do something that attracts more power, more players to come in, and at the cost of getting a BMW or a VAG or you know, an Aston Martin, for example, if the cost of that is that we lose Mercedes, pay it.
Yeah, look, it won't get to that because the structure, the costing structure, the financial structure they'll introduce next week, I think all the teams will go, oh, okay, we get it. It's we're gonna get sort of compensated for it eventually.
Yeah,
if they agree to that structure, then, you know, people will just cop it on the chin.
I've watched I've been watching Formula One for a long time. So saw the V12s come to an end, and the turbos come to an end, and then there was some 12s, and then there were the 10s, and then there were the 8s, and now there's the V6 turbos, and, you know, you've got to spend money to be part of the sport, and you can't just go, well, you know, we want to keep. I mean, the people who would be defending Mercedes in that position are the same people who are probably criticizing Ferrari in 2012 for arguing against a move to hybrid. You know, because Ferrari's going, we're going to have to spend all this money. It's going, you're just a dinosaur, Ferrari. You just want to keep using V8s. So, you know, I look at Mercedes and I go, hey, you're dinosaurs. You just want to keep an engine you know how to win with. So
yeah. Look, anyway, back to the point of, you know, those are the questions I have. Will that rev limit be enough to make it sound decent? And will the H removal be enough to make it sound decent? How, and, you know, upping the fuel flow limit and how much fuel they're going to have to carry more to be able to run the race. I think they can't leave it at 100 kilos because then you'll just be fuel saving for the whole race. So they're going to have to up that as well. And how does that affect the car? Like, all of a sudden the cars are going to be heavier again in the race, carry another, you know, 20 kilos of fuel or whatever it is. And
it's just less ballast. They'll be fine.
Yeah, they're on the weight limit. They are really on the weight limit, and they will save some weight. Apparently, they'll be 10 kilos lighter, but they've got to put more fuel in. So
they won't have as much. They won't carry as much weight with batteries with energy store because they won't be generating as much.
But the K will be bigger. The K will be bigger. So I think that's why it's only 10 kilos lighter, which is, you know, they can balance it out and put 10 kilos more fuel in when they increase the fuel flow rate. Maybe they run with 110. Or 115 kilos of fuel at the start of a race, and then we end up with similar sort of performance to what we have now. But just a couple of little questions like that need sort of answering. Yep. But I think in general, realistically, is a single turbo with a bigger K better than, you know, a twin turbo? I think the twin turbos sound crap. So potentially a single turbo with higher revving might be the way to go with engine noise.
The drivability will also fall off as well because the MGUH, the way that it handles
plug
the turbo,
gaps.
It removes the turbo lag, so you'll lose some drivability. But once again, if it's the same,
I'll sort that out.
If it's the same for everyone, I don't care. Like as long as they open up the sport to competition and they make the sport more appealing to other players, that's the thing that matters to me. And of course, the other thing is, will anyone be watching after the Halo comes in? Is anyone going to care? Like, is anyone still going to be watching the sport after 3 years of a Halo?
Look, to go back a little bit to what we were talking about before, you're watching Verstappen, Vettel, and Hamilton, all three go into turn one on the weekend, which probably didn't notice it at the time because I was wondering, well, what's going to happen here? But watching it on replay again, it was pretty awesome to watch those three going into turn one side by side.
And imagine if you're throwing an Alonso and a Ricciardo, and it's a good race.
Like next year is going to, you know, the Halo's coming in next year, but there's so much to be excited about from the racing point of view.
You've jinxed it now. You know what's going to happen. We're going to get to winter testing, and Mercedes is going to be second a lap faster than everyone else.
They won't. I don't think Alonso will let it happen.
Oh, he holds the world in his hands. All right, we've managed to drag this out for an hour and 10 minutes. So I think we'll call it there. We've covered a lot of stuff between the two of us. I think I'm in need of a drink now. So thanks for your contribution tonight. I feel like we had a good chat, and we nutted a lot of things out.
Yep, plenty to talk about, and we'll see what happens.
I think we should just drop the other two and just keep it to the two of us.
Yeah, well, I've been following the sport longer than they have anyway, so...
Yeah, and I'm older than all of you. All right.
Yep.
Well, take care, everybody. Thanks to everybody who tuned in, and don't forget to subscribe on the YouTubes and on the iTunes and on the SoundClouds and all those kinds of cool platforms.
Leave some comments.
Send
me your questions. I'm happy to answer.
Only the good ones. Yes, definitely. Be sure to. I know we're a bit sporadic and unpredictable at the times that we broadcast, but when we do stream this live. So if you join in, you can ask us questions. Always happy to answer, no matter how bad the question might be. I mean, we usually have Luce in here anyway, and he's a bad question all on his own. So.
Do not tweet me whether Seb hit Hamilton deliberately or hit you deliberately.
It's certainly not hashtag Ask Crofty. We will actually talk about things other than conspiracy theories against Lewis Hamilton, and that's that. So we have the next race being Brazil. I think is not this weekend, the weekend after. It's a terrible time zone to be in Australia at the moment to try and watch Formula One, but we've got 2 races to go in the season. Let's hope it ends well. I'd like to see another win for Ricardo and another win for.
Is this a final thoughts thing?
Yeah, we're gonna do a final thoughts. We'll get there. So hopefully we'll see some good races. But yes, final thoughts from you then, Matt.
Final thoughts. It should be an awesome end to the season with 3 teams fighting for the win and no championship to worry about. So Seb and Lewis can close the door on Max when he's side by side with them going into the Senna S. And looking forward to that battle recommencing with the gloves being off.
And what sucks, of course, is that Ricardo's likely to have a back of the row start, back of the grid.
Maybe, I don't know. I think they'll have to wait and see with that because it was a new engine. I doubt the turbo just went bang. Maybe something wasn't quite right with the way it was all set up.
It wasn't connected properly, like the Ferraris. I forgot
lost the turbo.
Yeah, I forgot to plug in a serial cable.
Yeah, so he might be all right.
Yeah, let's hope so. And the other thing to look for for the remainder of the season, there's a bit of a battle going on at the moment between the likes of Williams and Renault for position in the championship. So keep an eye on that. Renault in a much better position now with Sainz in the second car. They're no longer just a one-car team. Sainz has done a terrific job, and I think that they're a good prospect team for next year. That they could very well be next year's Force India in terms of where Force India are racing this year.
Yeah.
And Ocon is stretching his legs over Perez. That's my final thought. Is that the last couple of races Ocon has looked a much better driver than Perez. And I think that's a trend.
Credit to Stroll. He picked up that 6th place, which is kind of keeping Williams afloat.
Stroll's doing a great job, and he's been a better driver than Massa, I think, in the second half of the season. Since Azerbaijan onwards, he had a big boost in confidence, and he's been a very good driver. I think that if Williams made the decision to keep Massa for next year, it would be a huge mistake.
Yeah, I think it's time to move on.
Yeah,
get someone else and get someone young in there that can build with the team. There's someone with a bit of experience, but I mean, I don't want to drag it out, but Kubica would be a good choice. The rest, might not be so inspiring, but he wouldn't be a bad choice, I guess, given the options. So.
I think the three options on the table for Williams are Kubica, Kvyat, and Di Resta. I feel like all 3 of them are an upgrade from Massa. If it was me, I'd go for Kubica, but I've got to be careful because that's an emotional thing where it's like I'd really like to see him back. But having said that, he's a tremendously good driver, and I'd love to see him back in a Williams and then making Renault look foolish for not wanting to run him. That would be great.
We need Williams' help for that. So.
Yeah, Yeah, I think that I think we did discuss it earlier, but I think that there's a number of teams who are in for a very, very tough 2018 as the likes of McLaren and Renault, and they move forward, and obviously Toro Rosso, dark horse. They're going to be they're effectively a factory outfit next year. So
yeah, exactly.
That's not a bad effort for the former Minardi team.
Yeah, they've got more. It's funny when you think about how far they've come, and Seb winning for him back in 08. One of the guys said we're not a bunch of muppets, and they're also a good little team. So
yep, and even when you think about the Mercedes and where they came from, Honda, BAR, going back to like Ligier.
Ross Brawn goes, the dark days of Honda. He's talking about the back in the day there, not much has changed. 10 years later, nothing's changed.
All right, we'll have to let it go. We've gone way over time, but it's been a great chat. So thanks to everybody who did listen and will listen, and we'll catch you after Brazil for yet another edition of the Wall of Champions. We'll see you then.